Okay, ladies and gentlemen, today we're going to be reading Chapter 11, Joker's Wild. It is the last chapter or two that you will need to include in your assignment or your writing assignment for today, which is summarizing what we have read so far in this book. So, when you're summarizing, I want you to think about what is really important in moving the story forward, and what do you need to know from what we've read so far that matters to other people. Think about the stuff that if somebody missed a day of school and you wanted to tell them to catch them up in the book, what would you tell them about what we just read? Would you repeat something like a conversation? Probably not. But would you include the father's dying words when you're doing a summary? Probably, or maybe not exactly all of what he said, but just the gist of what he said so that we know that the boy misunderstood because he said something about jewels, and because they are thieves, the boy thought he meant jewels as in diamonds and such, but he actually meant jewels as in the sister's name of Julia, and that it was a nickname. That part probably wouldn't come up until, you know, maybe your second or third paragraph when you're then telling them what you now know that Jules means. So just be thinking about stuff like that as I'm reading and what you are going to write down. All right, Joker's Wild. Somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, the two officials fell asleep while watching a movie and drinking scotch. Why not? Mr. Soda said, pouring the liquid from the miniature bottle into his can. We have a per diem. March would have liked to sleep too. It was just that lately he had had this reoccurring nightmare about falling. He was climbing a cliff high above a body of water. Sometimes he was trying desperately to snatch at a hand. He could feel the grit of the rock against his palms and scraping against his cheek. He always woke up before hitting the black water. He didn't think death by falling was a great dream to have on a plane. He took out the moonstone and the pack of playing cards and placed them on his tray table. Jules had her earbuds in and was flipping through a magazine. He saw her watching him out of the corner of her eye. Per diem? March asked her. She removed one earbud, and March repeated the question. Yeah, it's an amount they can spend every day for food and stuff. We're their meal ticket, basically. Well, the big one stole my wad of cash, March said. $5 grand I'm not getting back. I should have hit him with a can of soda. She took out the other earbud. Things were improving. Yeah, that would have solved everything. Well, it would have given me some satisfaction, that's for sure. Piece of advice for you: never start a fight you can't win. March shook his head. You sound just like Alfie. I doubt it, Jules said, her lips pressed together. I didn't know he was my father until just a couple of months ago. How often did you see him? He asked. How much of a secret life did Alfie have? Only once in a while. He would show up occasionally at whatever pitch we had managed to scrounge up. Pitch? Yeah, the place street performers stake out, she explained. We started out in public squares, but then when Blue got the idea of the cloud swing, we moved into abandoned places where we could set up the rigging. We sometimes try to get a permit, but usually it's easier not to. Plus, the audience likes it better if they think they're doing something illegal. Blue calls it guerrilla spectacle. So Alfie would just turn up sometimes? Blue said he was a friend, and I didn't ask questions. She rubbed her knuckle along her lower lip. When you live like I did, it's better not to know things. He knew what Jules meant. He had lived with a thief. Alfie would leave him alone for stretches of time, leave him with instructions and cash and a smile, and then show up again one day, sometimes tossing the cash on the bed and saying, Easy street, kid. But Alfie had never asked, and March had never volunteered how scary that time alone had been. Like Berlin last fall, the girl with the cobalt hair had said. Alfie had traveled there for a few days, casing a job he was thinking about. He said, anyway. Had he been there for the stick and rag? How many of those times that he had left March in the apartment for days on end? How often was he really going to see Jules? How many lies? You've never let me down, March. He saw his father sitting in a pool of light in an armchair by March's bed. He had also said, I wish I could say the same thing about myself. There's things that I haven't told you. What had March said? They had been talking because he had been afraid to go back to sleep. He had had the nightmare. This time he had told Alfie about it. He liked how his pop had taken the dream seriously, asking him questions about it, even looked as shaken as March felt. Then he had dragged over an armchair close to the bed, saying he'd stay up until March fell asleep again. And even though March was way too old for this, he hadn't said no. After this job, we'll blow town. Head for the States. I've got things to tell you. Show you. It's time. Was Alfie getting ready to tell him about Jules? Was he going to clear up all the lies? Or just tell another? March tapped the deck and it fell out of his package into his hand. He fished out the jokers. One was ripped in half and he tossed it on his tray table. He held up the deck. Poker? He asked Jules. Sure. Jules' voice trailed off as she stared at the joker. What's the matter? That card. She leaned over to fish inside her backpack. She brought out a playing card, ripped in half. A joker. March picked up his half. Holding his breath, he held it out. Jules' half met his. They matched perfectly. Chapter 12. Playing for Pretzels. I got it from Alfie, Jules said, the last time I saw him. He said he had something special for me. Special? I said, it's just a torn up card. And he said I had to learn how to appreciate a lucky piece. He said, keep it in your pocket. Never let it go. Figure I needed luck, so here it is. They stared at the joker, both halves joined. Some joke, she said. It's so that we could recognize each other, right? Like something out of a fairy tale? Jules snorted. Oh, so this is happily ever after? Really? March shuffled the cards. He pushed them toward her to cut the deck. He told you he was your father? He asked. More like I guessed. He always would bring me presents, little things. He got me these puppets from Germany once, chocolates, a bunch of silk violets. Just a month ago, he bought me a sewing machine. I do all the costumes for the troupe. March shook out his bag of pretzels. He divided them up. Chips, ante up, he said. She pushed a pretzel forward. He matched it and then dealt 5 cards down. Alfie had taught him poker, and March had never been able to beat him. Alfie had shown him the most important things, like how to spot a tell, which is an indication of how a player might bid, and how to look for crooks. Never cheat, but be able to spot a cheater, Alfie had said. Jules frowned at her cards. Anyway, the last time I saw him was last week, the day we got to Amsterdam. Blue had a bunch of sites to check out for the pitch. They had this long argument. I don't know about what. I could only see their faces. I was in the caravan. Alfie left, and I ran after him. I just knew, suddenly. Why did he just keep coming around? I knew it wasn't for Blue, so I just said it to him. Hey, are you my dad? He started to bawl and said, yes. And then he had explained everything. But I said I didn't need any explanations. He asked me what I wanted for my 13th birthday. I said a turntable and some vinyl. He said he'd give me something better. A home. Jules grimaced. Well, he was right about that, wasn't he? A group home with a bunch of juvenile delinquents. She pushed 2 pretzels into the pot. Wonder why he kept us apart, March said. Probably because 2 kids slow down a crook? March glanced at her sharply, but she stared at her cards. He had a lousy hand, but he had a 2 and a 4 of diamonds. The chances of a straight weren't great, but he might as well go for broke. All he had to lose was a snack. See your 2 pretzels and raise you 2. She threw 2 cards down. Do you think we'll have to go to school? He dealt her 2 more. I'd say that's a given. Stinks. I wonder if we'll have to take tests. What are you supposed to know at 12? Geometry? She rubbed her knuckles against her lip. It was a tell, he decided. She did it when she was nervous. I know how to pick locks, but I don't think that's a subject. Dealer takes 3, he said. March held the cards without looking at them. He told me that, for my birthday, we were going to stay put for a long while. He must have been planning something. Right before the job, Alfie had seemed nervous. He had smiled and said, "Some jobs have higher stakes, buddy. This is one of them." Jules gave a dismissive shrug. Guys like him are always full of plans, and the plans usually revolve around them. She looked at him, her gray eyes glinting like silver. "Our dad was a liar and a thief. Face it, he handed me off to Blue when I was 2, like I was a package he was sick of carrying." She fanned out her cards. "Four of a kind." His eyes burning, March stared at his cards. It took a minute for the numbers and shapes to make sense. He felt a surge of triumph as he threw down his cards. He wasn't a liar. Straight flush. He scooped up the handful of pretzels and crunched down on one. And maybe he had a reason, too. Her eyes were red. Her cheeks were red, I'm sorry. "What kind of reason do you need to have to give away your own kid? I notice he kept you." "He said he went crazy after our mother died." "What are you, the excuser in chief?" "He's just not as bad as you think. And maybe he's not as good as you say." Angrily, March gathered the cards from the tray table. Jules clamped her hand on his wrist. "Wait a second." She picked up the top card from March's pile. She peered at it. When she looked at him, her gaze was pure fury. "These cards are marked. You cheated." And that's where we leave off. So, one thing that I want you to be thinking about now, we're leaving off on chapter 13, Grown Ups Lie. Um, why do you think she might be so angry and think that Alfie is just a cheat and a thief and a liar and all that, whereas March is actually defending him? What might be the reasoning for both of them? All right, ladies and gentlemen, so your writing assignment for today is summarize the chapters that we have read in Lute, making sure to include those important things that move the story forward. All right, have a great weekend.